Double barrel in a can. This week I'm looking at the double barrel single pot still Irish whiskey from Two Stacks. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, this week I'm looking at the double barrel single pot still Irish whiskey from Two Stacks that comes in a can. So let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Now first off, I'll say that Two Stacks do sell this in a full-size bottle. I'll put a picture of that bottle up there so you can see what it looks like. But recently enough, I was buying some stuff from the Two Stacks website. I saw they sold this whiskey in cans and I said, look, I'll buy myself a couple of cans, give it a taste and see if I want to buy a full-size bottle of it, because what they do with a lot of their whiskies on Two Stacks is they sell them, whether they're a super limited edition whiskey, they'll sell them in a can, or these ones like their kind of core range, they'll also sell them in a can. So you can give them a try, you can bring them on the go, you can have them at like a party, you can bring them out if you're going out and about, going to a parade or a festival or something like that. You can bring a little bit of a whiskey in a can, but also if you want, you can try it out, and that's what I did with their single pot still whiskey. This is one of their kind of core ranges. They've got like their blended whiskey, but they've also got their kind of what they call their double barrel series. So they've got a single grain that was aged in bourbon casks and then finished in sherry casks. They've got a single malt that was aged in bourbon casks and finished in sherry casks. And they got this one here, a single pot still that was aged in bourbon casks but finished in rye whiskey casks. So it was a 100% American rye cask. So rye whiskey is going to give you a little bit of spiciness that's going to complement the kind of core nature of pot still whiskey. If you're not familiar with pot still whiskey, it's the style of whiskey kind of unique to Ireland. It's made of a mash bill of malted barley, unmalted barley, and you can use some other grains in there too. So the malted barley gives you this kind of biscuity caramel sweetness. The unmalted barley gives you still sweetness, but like a little bit spicier, a little bit richer, a little bit oilier. And then the other grains you can play around with, like oats to make it a bit creamier, or rye to make it a little bit spicier. So it gives distilleries a bit of kind of freedom to play around with their whiskey. This here comes from the Great Northern Distillery over here in Ireland, because Two Stacks don't make their own whiskey. They just kind of buy it from distilleries and blend them together, or blend them in different ways, or give them different kind of cask finishings to make something a little bit different, a little bit unique. This whiskey comes in at 43% alcohol by volume, so it's not super low strength, but it's also not super high. 43% is fine for drinking. You're not going to get a lot of burn. It is natural color, as you can see. It's very light, so Two Stacks don't do the artificial coloring. It is non-chill filtered, so again, you're going to get like that character, the natural character of the whiskey coming through. And it's a no age statement whiskey. So if I was going to guess, I'd say it's between 4 and 5 years old. So it's not going to be super old. It's not going to be super young either. I'd say, because it got that kind of aging in the bourbon cask and then the finishing in the rye cask. So I think that's all there is to say about this whiskey. Let's go in for the nose on the Two Stacks double barrel single pot still Irish whiskey. Okay, it's quite fruity immediately. Like, I was expecting this whiskey, when I kind of tasted it first, I was expecting it to be a little bit like spicier up front, because it is this pot still whiskey that was partially aged, it was finished in the rye whiskey casks. But immediately I'm getting fruitiness. I'm getting like really rich kind of orchard fruit notes. I'm getting like a bit of apple, bit of pear, things like that. And then you get the spiciness. So you get that fruity kind of sweet character, and then you get the spiciness behind it. Like, there is obviously going to be some kind of like the vanilla from the bourbon casks, a little bit of caramel. There's those kind of notes coming through, but it was immediately very, very fruity up front. Sitting with it, like, I can get a little bit more of that kind of the rye cask influence, because rye whiskey is made with rye, which gives you this kind of like, I don't want to say herbal, but like kind of like black tea, eucalyptus, menthol. It gives you those kind of like earthy notes, and that here is coming through a little bit. You get not maybe the flavor of the rye whiskey, but like that earthiness, that earthy kind of influence of the rye whiskey is there. Like, you got this sweet hit of fruit, then you got like the caramel kind of softening it out, and then you get that like that earthiness there. So like there's this core flavor of earthiness behind everything else on the nose. I wouldn't say there's like a huge amount of like different notes here. Like, it's not like one note, like there's a few flavors in there, but there's not a huge variety of flavors. It is like that core whiskey flavor. You got pot still whiskey that was aged in an ex-whiskey barrel and then finished in another ex-whiskey barrel. So you're not going to get a lot of sherry fruitiness. You're not going to get that, like the port notes. You're going to get other flavors from the whiskey, but not anything else. So I think that's enough on the nose. Let's go in for the palate. Cheers. Much drier on the palate. Like you still get sweetness, but the fruity note was kind of absent. Like it's definitely there on the nose, but on the palate, it was much drier. It was much like earthier. It was definitely like got that rye influence coming through. It definitely leans more into that earthy, into that dry, into that slightly tannic kind of oaky note, because you're gonna get a lot of that first fill kind of American bourbon takes a lot of like the tannins away from the oak, but then when you reuse it, you still get the oak flavors. And same with rye whiskey, they fill it up first. It takes a lot of that oak spice, but it's still oak spice that can be left there, and still you get that oak spice lingers on, that earthy note, and quite a lot of sweetness. Now I didn't get a huge amount of spice on my first sip, so like that peppery pot still spice, that kind of characteristic note, didn't get a huge amount of that. So I'm gonna go in again for another sip and see how it goes. Cheers. Okay, yeah, there it was. There was that almost, I wouldn't, like, it's almost like, it's like the flavor of black pepper without all the spicy heat of black pepper, if that makes sense. Like, again, leaning into that kind of earthy side of it, the earthy note, and then a little bit of that peppery spice. There's a bit of cinnamon, those kind of baking spices, but more in that earthier kind of heavy spice flavor of the whiskey coming through. Like, it's definitely an Irish whiskey, so it's lighter, it's caramel. It's because it's not getting that first hit of the oak, it's getting the second hit. You get that spirit flavor coming through. So you are getting that kind of, sometimes with like pot still whiskey, you can get this kind of like green, grassy kind of hay note coming through, and that's coming through a little bit here as well with that earthy character, but that's kind of more into the finish. So I'm gonna go in for another sip, focus on the finish this time. Cheers. Yeah, so again, up front, you get that earthy hit, you get the sweetness behind it, you get that kind of the core flavor of the whiskey, and then onto the finish, I think the sweetness fades off pretty quick. Like you get that hit of sweetness and then it kind of goes away, leaving with that the flavor of the whiskey. It's almost like the natural flavor. It's like the difference between like a fruit and a sugary sweet. Like they're both sweet, but sweet in different ways. So this is, like I said, that kind of core natural flavor of the kind of the whiskey with that almost like green, grassy, herbal note. I would say that kind of the main note here on the nose is that earthy, not floral, but herbal note coming through with a bit of the rye spice. Yeah, that as I'm talking, as I'm taking a breath, that little bit of like that rye, eucalyptus, wouldn't say menthol, but like that eucalyptus kind of note is coming through as I'm breathing, as I'm taking that breath, as I'm talking, I'm getting that flavor coming through. It's not the longest kind of finish in the world. It's not lasting forever and ever. I'm taking a breath, I'm still tasting it, but it's not like I'm getting this huge hit that's staying with me. And it is at 43%, so it's not gonna be the biggest kind of impact of the whiskey. But yeah, it's a nice short to medium finish. I'd say between short and medium. Wouldn't say it's like it falls off flat, but it doesn't last a very long time. Before I give my final thoughts on this whiskey, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews like this every week on a Wednesday, and I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday. So if you want to see those videos, make sure you scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button, and while you're there, leave me a comment and say what kind of whiskeys you'd like to see me review in future, or if there are any cocktail recipes you think I should try out, let me know, because I'm always on the lookout for good cocktail recipes. Now, final thoughts on this whiskey. I think I'm glad I got it in the can. I'm not sure I'd buy a full-size bottle of this. It's solid. I like the fact that they do their blend, which is a blend of single grain, single malt, and single pot still whiskey. I like that they sell the kind of components, the different parts of the whiskey. I think I prefer the single malt and the single grain to this one. I think, I don't want to say it was like boring, but it was a little bit like that one note, that herbal rye note. Like if this had a sherry cask influence like the other two, I think you get a bit more sweetness. You get that kind of the flavor of the pot still whiskey with a bit of sherry, with a bit of a contrast. I think that would have worked a little bit well. I'm glad they tried out something different with like a rye cask. Just not my personal favorite. I'm glad I got the can of the whiskey. There's still whiskey in that can. It's not a bad whiskey, but it's just, if I wanted to buy a full-size bottle of something, I probably would buy something else before I would buy this. Not that it's a bad whiskey, just not my favourite whiskey, and if I can already try it in a can, I don't see the need to buy myself a full-size bottle, at least not right now. So I've already tried it. I will keep on enjoying this little glass of whiskey, and I'll see you next time. Sláinte.